Hey guys, George Mesa, Third Eye Edify podcast. And I am very excited to introduce everyone today to somebody that I met recently at a local coffee shop, as a matter of fact. And she was advertising her new book. And I had the pleasure of reading it very recently. But before I even opened it, just knowing what the topic was and meeting her in person and talking about it, I knew I wanted to have her on the show. And she has very graciously given us her time. And we'll get all into what it's about and everything. And I also mentioned in a previous episode, as a matter of fact, if you guys saw the episode Cabbage Patches and Oddfellows, I mentioned it almost as if it had already happened and we didn't even agree on it yet. So I'm very thankful that she is here, and we're already friends, and we barely have even talked for over 20 minutes. So everyone, please welcome Lilia Klaczynski to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. As soon as you told me that you had written a book about your experience growing up in Moldova in an orphanage of 800 people, if that's correct, 800?
800 children.
800 children, right. This is not including staff and everything else, right? So I was immediately, and I happened to be working on that orphanage episode at the time. Total coincidence that happens to me all the time as I'm making and creating episode and even just thinking about what to do. So I knew it was a divine meeting for us at that time. I also usually go to the drive-through of that coffee shop, and I happened to walk in that day, right? I happened to know your friend because I worked with her kid as a musician. So amazing. It's synchronicity, as it always is. And
wow, that was by chance. I didn't even know.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So please give us an idea of what your book is about, perhaps the inspiration. I think it'll be clear when you tell them, but you didn't write it right away. So I am wondering, first and foremost, what pushed you to finally do this? And did it come naturally? Did it happen quickly? Or did this take years to write? I'm very curious about that.
Sure. Actually, I've had the desire to want to write this particular book on all of these stories that I've had for the last almost 30 years. So since 1996, as soon as I landed on American soil, I have had people listen to my stories, inquiring me, and because they were just so amazed at just the littlest things, and but it was all new to them. And for me, it was just a way of life. And they wanted to know, and they all proposed, hey, you should put it in the book format. But in that time, English was a barrier for me. So I couldn't overcome. I couldn't even form a sentence, let alone write a book. So that got put on hold. And then about 20 years ago, actually, I met my husband, and he was supposed to be for the purpose of helping me write my book. But instead, we got married and had a whole bunch of kids. And life went on and got shelved again. And it was only about 3 years ago when I actually met my biological family for the first time. A year ago, I went back to travel there. And for the first time, I met them face to face. And that was the third prompting that I had to go ahead and write my book. And of course, this time I came up with a billion objections. And all those objections were overcome, actually. And on that morning of November 5th, I heard that voice that was loud and clear that said, write. So I said, okay, it's time to write. And it took me only about 3 months to put it all in the book format. But I would say, Jorge, that I have already lived the life and I already had the stories. It was just a matter of putting it down on paper.
Of course. I think that happens a lot when the inspiration is there. And even whether it's positive or negative inspiration. And we will discuss perhaps the word inspiration a lot today to inspire and to take in the gifts that we are given as far as just breathing in general, right? So, I do have another question actually, because the book is written in a way where, and this is just passing thought that I actually just thought of, is that I took a critical writing class in college. And because I've always been a writer as well, as a matter of fact, I gave you my book, right, the first day we met, because your husband seemed interested for sure. And I was shown a technique called 1 moment fully realized, where you would grab an index card and essentially meditate for at least 20 minutes, Find yourself inside of a memory and reproduce it from that vantage point, not from you remembering something, but from who you were then and writing it in that style. I think you've managed to capture a childlike essence in the book. It's very, very readable. Besides any cultural or language barriers, it flows very naturally. The topics just keep coming. The instances keep flowing. You're waiting for the next thing. You're waiting for the next age. You're waiting for the next Christmas, as is mentioned often. I know it wasn't called that. And but this is a huge success. You managed to produce your memories are not just memories now when you're writing as an adult. You've managed to bring the reader into who you were then, thinking about it in a certain way. I didn't know what this was. I've never heard of this before. Things like that. I'm not even sure if you meant it, but it did come out that way. And I think it makes it much more readable. It almost, you forget that it's nonfiction. It almost has a fiction quality. Like, are all of these things even possible? And in the world that you grew up in, I would say that it's very possible and more. The ups and the downs. There's just some very negative things that happen along the way too. And big success.
Well, really. I'd like to add to that, Jorge, that yes, so my book is actually written in a visceral type of experience. When I had begun to write, there was a lot of stories to share. There was a lot of experiences to share. But there was just, because of the culture we live in today, and the book is mostly written for the American public, there was going to be a lot of intellect to explain away this or explain away that. And I decided, you know what? I don't need to explain anything. I'm just going to go back and write it in a childlike format so that the reader can grow with me and not literally, but mentally experience what I went through of my growing up from the crib to age 15. So, and it sounds like it offers that, because a lot of my listeners and readers have expressed exactly that. I mean, there's a lot of ups and downs. It is like a roller coaster ride, but you're experiencing everything under the sun, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Right. I assume anyone that knows what the subject matter is ahead of time should at least expect that. Didn't think it would be a very smooth, clean path to the finish line. I really doubt that anyone expects that. And I also think that there's a humongous cultural misunderstanding very often when it comes to northeastern, eastern, southeastern Europe versus Russia. Like, there's a very large gap of information missing for most people here in the West. And I do think it was intentional and by design, because we're very similarly aged. And, it's always been Russia bad guy, And I remember very particularly, I had made an episode called Drop Your Heroes, which is essentially, you get old enough, you start to realize that show you liked was pushing ideas you don't agree with anymore. Or you watch tennis your whole life, they kick out the Belarusians and the Russians. Like, all right, well, I'm done with tennis. I'm not going to stand by anything that would kick out a nationality from a sport just because of any, international incident that may or may not be happening. It bothers me a lot, as you can tell. And I don't
actually, to add to that cultural upbringing difference. So, and that's you growing up, I'm assuming, here in America, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, and then we have friends that have grew up only 12 kilometers down the road from me, and they have had a night and day of a difference. Because, I mean, where I grew up in the orphanage, because it was inside the closed system, considered inside the fencing, and it was ran by the government full time.
Right.
We had one way of doing things. I mean, just outside of that fence, it was a whole other world out there. And they didn't know what we were going through, and we hardly had any clue what they were going through. So we do compare a lot of my notes. I have a friend that's the same age, and like I said, grew up just down the road, and we compare those notes, and it's like, wow, were there that vast of a difference? Yes.
Yeah.
There was just a few similarities as
Sure.
in like the setting of the buildings and things like that. But overall, the ideals and how things were done, very different.
Sure. And I was born in New York, so I had a good idea of cultural differences only by nature, only by, mannerisms and speaking and stuff. But, until I really started studying, music, actually, I didn't really get the better feel of how things were different geographically, culturally. That's when things really clicked for me. It certainly wasn't from my social studies class in school growing up. That's for sure. Definitely did not get the edge on. This book could have been 1,000 pages or easily, right? So I think you also did
I could have added so much more, but a lot of it would have been repetitive,
Sure.
only because a lot of these instances were just reoccurring over and over again. So
I can respect it as a musician when a lot of times it's very hard to say no to things you really like, but you have to take the part out of the song. It doesn't work. And I'm sure you threw some things away that you didn't want to. And I know that can be very, very difficult as an artist too, or an author or anything like that.
Well, I did spend a lot of time praying and reflecting in hopes that, okay, if this is where God wants me to be with this is what I'm going to serve. But granted, I will say, about 6 years ago, I went through an emotional health journey. And granted, if I would have written this book 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or even 6 years ago, it would not have come out the way I have written it today. Because in those times, probably it would have come out doom and gloom, dark, and just so nothing to look forward to in life. But when I went through the emotional health journey about 6 years ago, through Murray Method, that's what worked for me. And that offered a whole brand new perspective on how to be able to write out my short stories in a short story format, and a lot of balance in there. So, like, for example, Jorge, when you read a lot of my short chapters, they start out in a neutral, then they go into a very difficult process. And then at the end, it also highlights the goodnesses. And that's what my goal was, because there's so much turmoil that you're reading through. I do add a lot of highlights in between. I like to call them God highlights, because it's taken me this many years to be able to come to a place to recognize a lot of the good things that took place in my life. Especially now that you've read my book, you've seen how much darkness existed. And so, yes, so this particular program allowed me to find that balance and be able to serve it in that way in the book. So that was a blessing. Wow. That was a huge blessing.
I'm sure. Yeah. Being able to write this book is already means that you've found some kind of at least closure, at the very least, with what was and what now is. I'm very curious. I'd never heard of the Murray Method, so I noticed that you mentioned it in the book. I'm sorry, you maybe mentioned in the back of the book. I'm very curious about it, and I think maybe we can discuss it in a little bit. I'm curious exactly what it means and what it did for you, because I think my viewers would be interested too. Any kind of healing in any direction, no matter how, whether it's herbal or spiritual. It's worth mentioning on a show like this, because people are always have their minds open to it. I think that something I really want to get out of the way that I noticed in the book is, and it maybe listeners now are trying to think of all the things that could be or might not be as an orphan for that long in such a huge facility where personal attention may have been difficult, I assume, for in a lot of ways. It seems as if you weren't sure of your age until around age 8, and you never even found out your birthday until about age 14. Are these ages correct? It's incredible. You don't think of that.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
It was about age 12 when I found out how old I was. What is it? What is my name?
Right.
Just the identity aspect of it was just like, wow. There's more to me than just my first name and where I was. That was fascinating for sure when I came to that place of discovery and hearing it for the first time.
Sure. And you mentioned also the first time you saw yourself in a mirror, which was not right away at all. You also spent your first 3 years in a hospital. Is that correct? Because you were born prematurely.
The first 3 years, and then a lot of years added up in months and things like that through the 15-year period. Mm-hmm.
Right. Because the premature birth is one of the things I mentioned in the Coney Island incubators that were happening in my previous episode, which I think a lot of my viewers have seen that are watching this. So that was a very curious thing. I wonder how often premature babies are potentially taken to say they're not going to make it, and then they place them somewhere to live somewhere else. We may or may not get into that, but you were told eventually that your parents were both dead, as a matter of fact.
Yes. So I wanted to add to that a little bit for premature birth. So
Oh, sure,
in
sure.
that time, I know there was a lack from what I understand. I mean, now today I do a lot of research. I look back and I try to find out what was going on in the common. By the way, to everybody that's listening, I did grow up in the 80s. It's during the former Soviet Union communist times. Moldova, that was part of Russia in that time. It's one of 12 countries that existed in the group in that time. And Moldova sits on the very far west side of the territory. So after the World War II, a lot of the babies there was still a lot of procreation, but there was a lot of men that have been killed from the World War II. Because there was a fewer men and more women, there were more babies coming, but there's not enough fathers to take care of them, to care for them. So the system decided it is time to go ahead and consolidate a lot of these babies because they're just finding them on the streets. They're finding them in the dumpsters. I mean, they were just everywhere, coming up from everywhere.
Sure.
And about in the 60s and the 70s, they started to consolidate them. From what I remember, my World War II teacher, veteran, when I was little, he was the one who was telling us the stories of the large influx of children coming in to Moldova. Moldova had gained its nickname dumping grounds because of the large amount of children coming in. But in that time, my orphanage of 800 children, Jorge, was not the only one there. There was a lot of orphanages in Moldova itself.
Sure.
So, I mean, if you travel 10, 12 kilometers, you're going to get another one there. I don't know if they were all just as large as mine was. My particular orphanage did not house physical handicapped children. There were a lot of other orphanages that housed a lot of children like that. My orphanage housed a lot of like alcohol fetal syndrome, schizophrenias, and things like that. Mentally ill children, there was plenty of. And so in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, they started to bring them in. And I just happened to be there in the 80s. And yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, Jorge.
No, it's fine. There's plenty to be mentioned, and there's no way we're getting to all of it. So you just say whatever you think actually is great. So don't worry. I guess luck was on your side in that respect, because you didn't mention that you were a victim of any of that in the book, and that you knew that people around you were. So you made it out. You apparently had other than being premature, you seem to have been born healthy enough to make it pretty far. Is that true?
Yes, thank you so much. So the system itself didn't have the ability to care for the premature babies, from what I understood. Mm-hmm. I technically was considered almost like a miracle baby because I was born at 4 pounds, 2 ounces.
Oh, wow.
And now I know, and now I'm finding out from my adopted mother, that's going to be in the next book, that she was apparently told that I was born premature, obviously, and that I would not be able to survive. So from what I know, I was left in the hospital at birth. And then from there, I spent about 3 years there. I couldn't speak or talk or even walk for the first couple of years. I was very behind in that. Granted, like you said, luck. Well, I like to replace it with a blessing.
Yeah, right. Good.
A lot of the children were mentally ill, and for me, because it was the norm environment that I was growing up in, I couldn't distinguish or differentiate between norm or abnorm. So for me, I mean, I was taking on the habits that those children were experiencing.
Sure.
And to add to that, Jorge, what was difficult was as is mentally, I don't know if anybody's familiar with alcohol fetal syndrome. There's many different levels of that. And if you don't have the medicine that you need, there was a lot of acting out. And so a lot of those acting out and the habits, we pretty much all adapted because that's all we knew. That is all we were exposed to.
Right. And you still managed to come out, what would seem on the surface, a normal person, right? Yeah. Everything's normal. Everything's great. But this is part of this is the miracle of humankind in general. I found that a lot of people with very severe upbringings often have a capacity for love that is even bigger. And maybe you mentioned it in the book, and I don't remember if you did you got to go to the lowest low before the highest high. Did you say this, or is that actually one of your personal praises that I did not mention yet? Hold on.
No. How low, it is one of my quotes. Thank you, Jorge. How low one will go is how high one will fly.
Yes, that is it. Yep, I see it. Because you had listed a few prayers and a few personal praises in the beginning of the book that you yourself had come up with. I had just done an episode about manifestos and manifesting things in your life simply by saying them or writing them. And I wrote one and I threw it on the wall here. I said, there, manifestation complete. And you,
So that
it's a
one,
big deal.
yeah, that one came out actually about 5, 6 years ago when I dove into a lot of my emotional health journey,
Right.
and a lot of healing came from that. That one came in that time, so I realized how far I was willing to go to the very core of my original being. Is if I was willing to dive in and deal with everything under the surface, I
Right.
came out only higher than I could ever imagine.
Sure. I think a lot of people call this shadow work and other names for it, where you look back, you find what it is that's potentially holding you back. And it's often something from your past that you've never confronted, whether you were there for it or not. We often shut down when these things happen. And then it suddenly is 30 years later,
Yeah.
and it's very, and because I also am starting to get more into practicing biofield tuning, where you work on areas of a biofield that surround you, and energies are stuck from the mother's side, from the father's side. These could be generational. It could be something that happened when you were 5 or when you were 30, and they hold you back from realizing your true potential very often.
Except in my case, and it's a family of origin.
Yeah.
In my case, family of origin was only the orphanage. There, I mean, I
Right.
don't know how much of the genetics was really there. For me, most of when I take the time to recognize or look back, a lot of my holdbacks were actually just my traumatizing orphanage upbringing.
Just your experiences. Sure. I mean, the loneliness must have been extreme, and I can't imagine.
A lot, just the lack of the nurturing from the mother,
Right.
wanting to be held, wanting to be hugged, wanting to be kissed or touched. I mean, there was a lack of physical affection. There was a lack of emotional upholding and things like that. But then there was also physical abuse that took place. So that really only there was great disbalance, more of this abuse and then less of this. So
And right. Yep. Yeah. There was a large void, which was being filled maybe more than you even knew at the time by something that is very hard to define. But I'd like to get into that soon. I don't want to get into it yet because I find it very interesting that you didn't really mention it at all. And yet it was clear that something was helping you. There was something
along
there.
the way.
There was something there at all times, right? Yes.
Mhm.
So interesting that the low versus high, because I looked into things like the Hermetic principles and stuff, where there's ideas of scale, where cold is a lack of heat, and the idea that it all exists on one plane, for example, and no matter what, you can't get higher until you get lower. It has to swing back in the opposite direction, like a pendulum. Doesn't swing full until it hits the other side, and I think that you exemplified that well. It shows that you don't need to have a book tell you a prayer in order to find your own that either resembles one or just works for you. It just has to be comforting. It just has to work. I'm going to have an episode on rituals very soon. People take part in rituals every day, even if it's just brushing your teeth. This is a ritual. You probably do it around the same time every morning. You have to do these things. We require it, much like the cyclical nature of the sky. We require daily
Habitual.
resets.
Yeah.
Yep. And you had more of that than anyone else as far as having a regimen in your day-to-day life, because you were kind of held to the confines of what was required of you. You had no
Yeah.
choice.
It's amazing you say that because the former Soviet Union, it had the goods and the bads.
Sure.
So during my upbringing, what I recognized that was really good, and especially because there was such a large quantity of children, they did really well when it came to the disciplining aspect, as in like daily regime, going to bed at the same time. The children need their help me out. To be able to go at the same time to bed, eating meals a certain time.
Right.
They need that consistency.
Discipline.
Right?
Discipline.
Mm-hmm. And consistency in schedule and this and that.
Sure.
So
It's lacking.
in that regard, it did really well. But then in some cases, it went too far, and because there was a lack of like, for example, during the fall of the communism, because we went from like 30 to 40 children per teacher. In the US, that would never be a thing, but
Sure.
in the Soviet Union former times, it went up to about 60 children per teacher.
Wow.
And I would never excuse their behavior, but now I understand, looking back, that they were so overwhelmed. The only way to be able to have had that order was to apply fear. And a lot of times fear was applied through a form of physical abuse.
Sure.
Or emotional, mental abuse. So, and so that part, I mean, obviously coming from a human being, I don't think that was a part of the Soviet structure, but just part of the human being trying to get through what they need to get through in order to keep that structure. They also had their difficult ways of, and again, like I said, Jorge, I'm not excusing that behavior, because that was never okay. But looking back allows me to reflect and like, oh, wow, this is what they had to go through as well. It just opens up a little bit of that. It opens up a little bit of that room for pity or compassion or understanding to a degree.
Sure. And that needs to be there, because everyone is actually a human doing all of these things. Everyone is a baby at some point and helpless. And, you grow and you turn into whatever you turn into. But it could have been trained. They might have been trained to do that. This is how you do it. It might not even have been a subconscious choice. And it's very hard to know half the time what, it is unfortunate. But, that reminds me that I don't think I mentioned in the episode, I think we talked about it before, in that your first language was Russian, even though you grew up in Moldova.
Yes. So during the Soviet times, it was Russian everywhere from when I remember where I grew up, and it was only Russian. During the fall of the Soviet Union, that would have taken place 89, 90, 91, right in that time. It was strict. It came from, they said, no more Russian. You're speaking Romanian from here on. So yes, it was like that overnight. There was a lot of transformation happening, and language was definitely one of them. And of course, like I said, lack of teachers was another one. Form of payment, for example, for the teachers. And the reason I mentioned it went from 30 to 40 students to about 60 students per an adult disciplinarian was because during the fall, there was no funds anymore coming in from the government. All stopped. So during communism, we still had received 3 meals a day. We had the very basics, of course, that's being served to us. There's no such thing as a snack. I didn't get introduced to that till I came to US.
Wow.
But during that time, I mean, if a bowl of manka, which is a cream of wheat or oats, or a green pea soup was served. Milk was extremely rare. That was like a super rare treat.
Yeah.
Bread was baked on the property, and that was also served 1 slice per day. We couldn't receive it per meal. And so if you can envision if I wanted to a little bit add to this, if you can envision Little House in the Prairie, or even Annie, when they deliver milk, when the guy when the guy delivers milk with the glass bottles, and well, that's how pretty much our setting was. Everything was brought in with a horse and a buggy.
Right. Orphan Annie, right? She was
Orphan Annie.
That's right. So, I just said Little House on the Prairie. That's so funny. My wife was wearing a hair clip, and if she's watching, she'll know. My wife was wearing, I said, you kind of have a Little House on the Prairie thing going on right now. I just said those words. That's funny. I haven't thought of that show in 20 years.
I relate to a lot of people, and a lot of elderly, like from 100 years ago. They would definitely relate to my story, because it's got so many similar. But outside the orphanage, and not in the same village that I grew up in, but in the bigger 2 cities that are part of Moldova, they had cars. I mean, if a car came into the orphanage, it would normally be a yellow taxi. It was because a minister was coming, a special guest was coming, or somebody to adopt.
Right.
And that was super, super rare on the rare occasions. But yeah, horse and buggy was the way we managed things.
It works, obviously it works. And
I forgot to add, so our orphanage territory itself, the reason I brought up about that veteran, he was our disciplinarian that was our World War II veteran. The orphanage itself was actually a World War II military.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And then it had a lot of like underground passageways and things like that. So yeah, it was a military compound.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of underground passageways pretty much everywhere. People keep finding them all over the place, anywhere you can possibly name. It's incredible. It has to be somewhat jail-like in order to keep that many kids under control, especially the younger ones. So it makes sense. Unfortunately, I know some jails have been converted into schools here. Kindergartens and junior highs and stuff. They resemble it. You get the same exact room every time. You get the same locker every time. It's just, that's the way it has to be. The uniform thing. And
I think I don't know if I would necessarily say jail like. It's more just a consistent routinely type of thing.
Right.
I mean, a certain structure is important to have because it's important to have that consistency especially when it comes to children. The only time it went overboard or too far to the other side when physical abuse was happening. And for us, it was very, very common. So in order to instill fear in us so that we would sit and actually oblige to whatever the teacher or the disciplinary wanted out of us, if we dare to be late in line for that meal, first of all, we missed a meal. If the fingers were pointing at you, if you got 20 fingers pointing at me, I didn't have a chance to be able to say, no, I didn't do it. There was no room for justifying, or at least, what's the word I'm looking for, to say I didn't do it.
Right.
So once the finger pointed at you, you got beaten. And beaten was very harsh. So, I mean, talk about prison-like or jail-like. That's where it went overboard. So in this case, for example, some of the examples, and I'm sure you've already read it in the book, was walking on dry corn.
Yeah.
On our knees.
On your knees, right?
Like a duck walk. And it's like with your hands behind your head, because if you had it anywhere near you, it would be too much support to use your hands to be able to walk. One of the other ones was, and I learned it later on, but it wasn't funny at first, of course. But when the teacher wanted to beat you with a stick, we would go out there. And my first experience with that was I got the fresh green sticks. Oh. And because they were so beautiful in the springtime, and I went and got those. And when she beat me with those, and I'm watching the older boys come in with the big ugly sticks, I soon quickly learned that I want to come in with the ugly stick, and I'm going to get hit with it next time, because those fresh greens, let me tell you, they were like rubber.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yes. 1,000 sit-ups were very common. And another one was
1,000.
like 1,000 sit-ups.
Wow.
With a heavy chair above your head, not on your head, above your head. And then the other one was very common was moit pali. It was like a nickname for it. So washing of the floors. So they would take you by your hair and nothing but by your hair. And they would just shove you right and left. Just like this. And I mean, I could do was hold on to my head, because it was painful. It was just brutal. So that was physical form of abuse. It took place, but yeah.
Right. And you did unfortunately experience other kinds. And, we'll get to that as we'll take that topic as needed, if needed. But
talk about like instilling that fear to that degree in order for the child to cooperate. That's how we went to those levels. You know what I mean?
I do. I think that a lot of people, I mean, even in my book, World War U, I think that I mention it. I don't focus on it too much, but the idea that fear very often generates a group mentality of subservience almost immediately, because if it's not happening to them, they can see that it will. And then immediately everything is whatever they want, you're going to do it, and, or if you can still not do it and the finger gets pointed, and then you get punished.
Well, that was just it. And I wanted to add to that. Another thing is, so subservient, or the submission aspect of it. But in our case, it was very quick, very easy almost, because we almost knew no other way. There was nobody else to stand up for us, or to say, hey, this is not okay. Hey, this is inappropriate. I never would have even thought, the thought never would come to my head that one can stand up for the other almost in that way. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you were completely alone.
And no brother, no sister. It was adults that we never had any adults to be able to stand up and say,
Right. And they weren't family. They were just a Why would they? Right. I'm sure that they had to put their emotions in check. If you made relationships with some of them, could they really be in a position to stand up for you? I really doubt it. They just let it go. I'm sure it was tough for some of them, some of the more good intentioned employees. I'm sure it was very tough for them too, actually. They may have thought, I'll work at an orphanage. I can help these kids. They have nothing. But then they suddenly realize that they have to enforce certain rules and do certain things. Who knows? It's tough. It's tough you won't know unless you're in that position. And like you said, maybe a little pity is okay, because it's not that they were just doing their job, but they may have actually thought the job was going to be different. That's something to think about too.
And when you have such a large quantity, you're like, well, what do I do now? There still needs to be a structure. There still needs to be a form of discipline. There still needs to be some sort of a routine that you got going, and especially with children. I mean, now that I have 4 children of my own, Jorge, I have one in college,
right,
and I have the youngest one is 12. So
yeah.
I mean, I have been in this place of growing and understanding, like, wow. So to a degree, I am thankful for some of it, or for a lot of my orphanage experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
Because a lot of those things I did take into my own adult life, and I was able to employ a lot of the disciplining aspects, and especially when it comes to like a routinely daily approach and things like that. I didn't know any other way, so this is the type of a thing. So, for example, like if my mom-in-law comes over and she wants to offer each kid a meal of their own, choose whatever you want on the menu, I'm like, no, I'm serving oatmeal, and that is what we're all eating.
Right, that's it.
I don't have the luxury to want to be frivolous with foods.
Yeah. No, I get it. I do. It's hard to keep grandma in check sometimes when she brings all the sweets over. Like, they already had a sweet yesterday, and I'm not getting one today.
God bless her. No, I have let her do her thing, but
of course,
because obviously I have come to a place to learn to want to allow my balances to be able to give it a little bit of the room too. You know what I mean? Because I do want my kids to be in an environment where they're learning to choose for themselves. They're learning to say yes. They're learning to say no in a healthy way. They're learning to set their own boundaries. They learn to express the likes and the don't likes and things like that. But it's also important for me to, what was also important for me too, is for them to have a respect for the adults, to have a respect for their parents, just to be able to learn to recognize what is okay and what is not okay. So a lot of growing to do. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, definitely. Even the word no, very interesting. Sometimes using it doesn't work at all. And it's also, they do need to be able to say it. You can't tell them you can't say no. I've said that. You can't say no. And then I'm thinking that's not right. It's not exactly correct, actually. You do need to be able to say no. It's a very important word, as a matter of fact. And I have 3 much younger kids, 3, 4, and a newborn. And then
congratulations, by the way, Jorge.
Oh yeah, she's doing great. Home birth, it happened right here, right on this bed, right here. It's incredible.
What a blessing. That's awesome.
And I also have 2 amazing stepkids who are a little older, and 2 kids from her previous marriage, and so there's 5 in total sometimes in the whole house. It's great. We got the whole party here. I'm familiar with how different things get, and it's tough. You want to reprimand appropriately, and it's very difficult to find that. It takes a lot of time, and each kid's different anyway. So it's not like you learned enough with one and then you do it with the other one.
Okay. And you just said it too. That's another perspective, and interesting perspective is, as I'm raising my own children, I'm realizing how individual they really are. They all have their own separate needs, their own character, their own likes and don't likes. In the orphanage, we didn't have that choice.
Sure.
In the orphanage, we were brought up in the exact same way. No, it was like we were not allowed to have a like or a dislike. Not that I even knew what that was in that time, you know what I mean? Because what I had is what I had, which was nothing. Yeah. You know what I mean? Everything yet nothing. So, yes, like the disciplinarians, they treated us, and they had to treat us in the same way. There was no time for them to sort through 60 different emotional perspectives.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, not possible. It's not possible. It really isn't.
I mean, in some cases, you do have to apply that exact same approach. And then school settings is a great example of that. Although I do feel like at times they do a pretty good job still individualizing and giving everybody their own little space. Right. But for the overall, at least here it's given that, because where I grew up, Jorge, I had noticed my biggest, and I'm going to be writing that in my next book. My amazement when I came first to U.S. was when I was in the school setting for the first time. I had noticed immediately that there was a separate section just for handicap. There was for mentally ill or physical handicap. There was a separate school for physical or mentally incapable. And I was impressed with that, because in my case, that wasn't the case. In my case, even mentally ill were expected to perform at the exact same level as I was, for example. And so that was one of the biggest things I noticed as soon as I was exposed to the U.S. school settings. I was like, wow, they actually have a separate section for these guys. How cool is that?
Right.
So I did want to acknowledge that. That was such a great experience I had. Knowing where I came from, that was really good.
Yeah, no, it's a good thing. And you grow up and you don't realize that that's not the case everywhere. You just assume what you grew up with is everything. And it's definitely not. And I try to find those things on this show. I try to find, hey, I grew up thinking this, and just not only like this right here. There's a lot of things that are only a certain way where you grew up. And that's the nature of the world. That's why there's different continents and different countries. There's, you got to respect that. Different cultures, different strokes, different folks. And I am actually very curious about exactly what you just said. Because near the end of the book, when you were about to be adopted, it seems like you were adopted older than some. Were you the above average in age by the time you were adopted?
Definitely.
Most
I was
definitely.
only so let's see, I was always on the adoption list because, for whatever reason, I was always there.
Yeah.
But when I reached a certain age, there was less and less. So, and as they took the time to bring me in the office to show me off to the potential parents, there was always a reason or excuse. Her eyes are too big. She's too skinny. She's too tall. She's too white for us, because we would have sometimes Germans or Italians come look at you and they wanted a darker skin. And so I always figured that I just wasn't good enough for whatever reason. I just couldn't reach those of who they would have wanted. So age 16 is when you became an adult in that time during the Soviet times. And I was 14 when the potential parent did come into the orphanage, and she looked at me. Though the bodyguard, which was very common in that time to travel with the bodyguard, because during the fall of the Soviet Union, everything became scarce. And I mean scarce as in it was very difficult even for the people outside the orphanage, for the workers to be able to acquire food, clothes, hot water, this and that. So traveling with the bodyguard was a very common thing if you did get to travel in that area. And so so when she did come to the orphanage, they pushed me away, said, hey, you're too old, we're here to get little ones. And so it was then when I realized, well, I no longer have a chance, and I'm only like 6 months away from turning 16 and eventually leaving the orphanage here. So
you would have been pushed onto the street. How does that work?
So, and that's what it is. They pretty much give you a pillow and a blanket and a toothbrush and have a good time.
Get out there. Yeah.
And and it was unfortunate because I knew when they would leave the orphanages, and I mentioned it in the book, I experienced firsthand, I saw what would happen to the girls when they left the orphanage. Sex trafficking was a very common thing, very common. Drugs, alcohol, abuse, physical abuse, that was very, very common. So for me being a girl, I was terrified just because I was a girl. I didn't know how much of a chance I had. Hearing girls missing, going all the time was very, very common. Very common. So no, I was near that age, and I just didn't know what was coming my way, and I was terrified of that unforeseen future. I didn't want to look into it because I saw what everybody else was going through.
Yeah, right. You already kind of knew, and you use the word meek. We're looking for meek, not you.
Oh, meek is that small for Romanian.
Yeah. Because meek, I thought actually that they were looking for physically and mentally disabled. I thought that's what you meant by it.
Oh,
You
okay.
just meant a smaller child, not
I'm
your
sorry.
age.
It translates to small and from Romanian.
Mm.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, the meek shall inherit the earth, right? That's what.
Oh,
So
that's the different meek, I think.
I think it's a different meek. Yeah, of course. So,
Funny.
but no, that makes sense now. I get it. I get it more. I wasn't sure. I was confused. I said there. I didn't realize. I thought to myself, maybe they are looking for disabled people specifically because those people were from Germany. I think at that time. I don't remember actually. Oh no, actually, this was the one that ended up taking you at the end of the book, right?
My adopted parents are from
Yeah,
US. Mhm.
right. And they were looking for younger, but they ended up taking you because I'm sure they must have
So
felt
they
it or
were looking
sensed
for
it. They
younger
sensed
ones.
something.
They ended up getting the younger ones.
Right.
I was just the add-on, last minute add-on.
Right.
And that was a blessing in itself.
Right. Right. Oh, tell me about it. Incredible. So let me also mention something else that I wanted to actually potentially start here, and we didn't really get. It's totally fine. But very early in the book, right in page 7, right at the beginning, you mentioned the Baba Yaga, which is an entity that has been mentioned on this show before, as we talk about all kinds of characters throughout mythology, throughout history. Some of them manifest themselves into people, unfortunately, and I think you experienced one. And but most importantly is that you said, and again, this proves that you are speaking from the perspective of yourself as the child in that moment. You said, I didn't want that for anyone else. You were seeing how this person was treating everyone when it was time for bed or any other time like that. And this selfless, I'm reading this word for word so I don't forget what I wanted to say here. The selflessness and genuine care for all humans is the core essence of human nature, no matter what the upbringing or environment is like. And you really, I don't know if you even meant to catch this moment here, but when you said that I didn't want that for anyone else, I think it really proved that you could have been a miserable, terrible person by this point already. You already could have been just unapproachable, a hateful person. And you were anything but that. And that this proves how amazing and genuine human beings really are. No matter where you're from, no matter what you're born into, no matter what language you speak, you are prepped and ready to be good always.
So Jorge, I wanted to say Baba Yaga, by the way, if anybody's listening, it translates to the witch,
right,
from the Russian language. And yes, in my case, I wanted to say that, oh my gosh, Jorge, I just lost my train of thought.
That's all right. We were talking about the goodness in all people, and I didn't want that for anyone else.
Yes. Okay, that's what it was. Thank you. I appreciate it. So for whatever reason, and I acknowledge that as a grace more than anything. The amount of turmoil that I have lived through, it's no different than a lot of the kids that have lived through in that orphanage as well. And a lot of boys have become hooligans. They have become extreme troublemakers, killers, sexual rapists in their adulthood. I mean, that's what they're on. That's the life they're on. Do unto others as you would like them to do unto you, as you would like to do them unto you, but don't do unto others as it was done to you. So for me, sort of like a golden principle, I live by that. And for whatever reason, I do feel God has instilled that grace in me to be able to not to take on what was done to me and then continue to become the abuser onto someone else. So in that case, I feel like in some way my heart was protected in a way and kept in such a way where I was able to keep a soft heart and not allow a lot of that to become where I just take it on and do it onto someone else. So I'm very thankful. I am thankful for that, considering the amount of turmoil that I have gone through in my childhood.
For sure.
I consider that a grace in itself as well.
I agree completely. And there's even more to add to that, but you already nailed it on the head there. It's there again, luck. There is a luck factor here. You could have easily not have been a reasonable person by then. You could have easily said that I'm just screw this. I'm just going to do whatever at this point. I've got no future, no life ahead of me. That's how most people would feel, I assume.
Indeed, I agree.
But you, not knowing much about the outside world at all, discovering things very slowly, piece by piece, not even having seen a mirror or know your birth date, and you still the instincts were good in you. Now you obviously, you allude to it, but it's not mentioned outright. And you didn't make the book about this, in my opinion, but you obviously, based on, I guess, what the Murray method might be about, which I don't know what it is actually still, and the ideas that you had mentioned about God, you said you didn't even know what God was until who knows when, much later on in your life. You didn't even realize what it meant. Christian missionaries showed up eventually, and you got to find out more about that side of things, what the Bible was. And I do feel that most holy books are very similar and try to give you the same level of appreciation for yourself and the world, and how this body is the entire world all in one. But you it's there all along. You didn't require a label for it. You may not have even realized it at the time, but clearly something allowed you to be sitting here talking to me about this right now with a book, and with having 4 kids in the USA of all places.
You could say that again, Jorge. That is an amazing acknowledgement in itself.
Right.
So yes, so the concept of God didn't exist in my closed system of the Soviet Union times.
Sure.
And obviously our God was represented by, I mean, the only thing I ever knew was obviously the serving of the red flag, the image of Vladimir Lenin that was on there.
Yeah, Lenin, you're saying, right?
Lenin.
Yeah.
Lenin. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm saying it.
No, it's fine. I just want to make sure the listeners know what because I know what you're saying. But
Lenin.
His image was everywhere, as if the a picture of God or Jesus, right?
Yes. Yeah. So that it's that essence of that's all we ever knew. And then, of course, during the fall of the communism, it's as if like the gates have opened up, and now they're allowing. And because we were so lacking in so many different areas, now we were in starvation mode. To the point of where we had to go outside of the orphanage, and whether if it meant girls selling themselves for sex, if it meant whatever it meant to put food into our stomachs, that's what it was.
Sure.
It was very, very unfortunate. So, but when the gates did open up, the missionaries started to come in. Christian missionaries, a lot of them were. They started to bring in clothes, which was for the first time I saw colors, vibrant colors for the first time.
Oh yeah, you did mention that in the book.
Yes, it was like I mean, if you look at all the pictures in the back of the book, you'll only see like the brown and the grays and the dark navies and blacks.
Yep.
The only time you'll ever see the prime colors, which was red mostly in those traditional costumes, or the red flag and etc. But so yeah, that was the first time I experienced vibrancy of the colors coming in. And then another one was like tasting exotic fruit for the first time, like oranges. It's like, oh wow, what is this? It's so amazing. It's so tasty. Yeah. And then of course they brought the message of the Bible and Jesus Christ. And it was like, wow. In that time, so before then, what had happened was I was getting bullied. I found myself in a situation where I got beat up really, really hard. And I call this chapter The Miracle at the in the depths of despair. Oh, I'm sorry, The Peace in the Depths of Despair. And so, sorry, I changed that title a couple of times when I was writing the book. And the reason I titled it The Peace in the Depths of Despair is because when I got beat up and I found no place to go but to run outside the orphanage, we were in a temporary camp setting in that time that sat in the forest, in the middle of the forest, in the middle of nowhere. I just pretty much said, I'm done with life. I wanted to run away from it all and just not to have to ever look back and just leave this forsaken place once and for all. But little did I realize when I was running through the woods, through the forest, I ran into the vines that grabbed me onto the forest floor, and there I went down, and I just ended up in a very, very thick pond. And it was so thick, I didn't know how to swim. And so I started to drown, and I fought my way as hard as I could, and came to a point where I just kind of pretty much let go. And it's as if like I had a life blink before my eyes, and I came to a place where I was drowning. I let go, arms to the side, and I just said, basically, I received peace in that time because I had sunk so far below that it was pitch black, and it was peace, as in like not one sound. You couldn't hear the earth sounds anymore. It was that peaceful at the bottom. When suddenly, I mean, obviously I didn't know anything about God in that time or anything, just this amazing power came from underneath me and picked me right back up. My faith is strong today, though I couldn't put name to that in that time. My faith is super strong to that in that way because of that, what took place in that time, and the miracle that took place in that time. Because, and I recognize that, you know what, I didn't have anybody else to stand up for me. I'm an orphan, and for whatever reason, this particular power, it sustained me. It offered me that extra grace and that extra mercy that took place. You know what I mean? So not knowing, not having the name for it for another few years, actually, for at least 4 years, I grabbed onto that, knowing that it exists. I mean, when it pulled me right back out, I was in the edge of that water shore. And then I moved myself into the open fields. I've never seen this territory before, so I was really taken by that. I was about 8, and it was like as if I saw the earth for the first time. I saw the sky and the green grass, and I just laid there in the sun for the rest of the day, and I passed out, obviously, because I was exhausted just from fighting in the water. And I looked at the sky, and I just wondered what was beyond that, because I was so taken by that. So at such a young age, I was extremely fascinated with. It's like I've always noticed nature and that solace, that I was able to find myself safe in that area, right? This time, I noticed it even more, because I had wondered, what is beyond that sky? What is that power that existed? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and to this day, it's a very strong one for me. Nobody can take that away.
No, and no one can answer this question yet either. It's quite a mystery. Something's beyond. There has to be, and you had a near-death experience, clearly, and something pulled you out. And it seemed like it wasn't your own body, or even if you had an adrenaline surge, it doesn't sound like you could have easily come back up from what you were in, the muck that you were in.
The thickness.
Right. And this is an incredible miracle. And this is the only time in the book that you had even gone into that territory where, is this fiction all of a sudden with this one moment? And that's been, but I know why it's there in the book. I can tell, regardless of, what you had said about finding God or anything like that. Because me personally, me and my wife, we certainly believe in a creator, and we have our own ways of worshiping and stuff. But, I don't necessarily, I'm not like a Christian. I guess I was supposed to be one, but I don't necessarily believe in Jesus Christ. I know all about the story. I know what it is. I believe that it's a wonderful path, and it teaches very good things. And I'm just letting you know that, I agree with everything that you're saying, even though we don't necessarily have the same exact faith. There is clearly something all around us. There's clearly something guiding the mechanism that controls our being. It's not just a heartbeat. There's a soul. And after doing some more of the biofield tuning, as I had mentioned, there's something surrounding us at all times. Mm-hmm. So maybe your biofield kicked in and something was able to actually treat you like a bubble and push you straight up. Who knows? It's incredible, but you're able to speak of it firsthand. You could have just been there forever, just in the bottom of no one would have found you.
I don't, as an adult, I don't get into too much theology. I respect everyone's approach to worshiping their creator as well. For me, in that time, obviously, if one wants to spend time and pull my story apart, like, hey, science can explain this or science can explain that, God bless them. If they want to do that, go right ahead.
But no, I think it's more than that.
I write of this experience because that's what propelled me to where I am today.
Right.
It propelled me. It as if, like, I was ready to go back. I faced my fears. I was ready to go back. And if it meant to be beaten up again, I knew that once this power saved me, what could stand in my way? What else could stand in my way? And so it was that type of attitude, if you know what I mean.
I do, of course.
I think that also allowed my I'm a very optimistic individual, very positive individual, that allowed for my positivity and optimism to grow as obviously years go by and where I am today. So, it propelled, obviously for me, I chose Christianity. So it just propelled my faith even more. Once I came to a place of understanding and knowing, religious perspectives and this and that. So
sure. And look, anyone that's not a Christian watching this, whatever doesn't have to be labeled, but your story and the power of what happened to you, it transcends anything. They don't need to believe in one thing or the other to understand the power of your moment. Also, I think a lot of people don't realize that you didn't even know what Christianity was, even though it seems like it's everywhere. It's not actually, and you didn't receive it until the fall of communism, like you said. You met a Christian missionary all of a sudden, and all of a sudden there was this brand new idea, and it clicked with you, like, maybe this is what I've been experiencing all along. It wasn't Lenin's picture that lifted you up from the, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So this is, it's a big deal.
And I described it as the great power, because
the great power.
In that time, I didn't know how else to describe it. Whatever it was this great power that existed beyond. I just couldn't. In that time, I couldn't put a name. So obviously, when you read that book, and because I did write it in from a child perspective and my memoirs, it describes it exactly that way.
Yeah, and a great power is a really great way to say it. Is a great power, greater than our own, of course, and with the ability to choose that it was not your time, is even more profound. This is not a human decision often. And,
it was an instant like that, and then there was another similar instance that just obviously science can't explain. But anyway, it was another one where I was beaten up, bullied, and I was running from the orphanage. But anyway, there was a drunken man this is in the middle of the winter, blizzard storms, and now I'm much older. I have heard about this guy named Jesus and his stories and the great power that, the love that exists. And so I have heard those stories, but in this time, I'm already about age 14. Actually, I just had recently found out that I am going to be taken to America, right? And so, and for that reason, it was the adopted mother gave us some toys. A Frisbee got thrown into that bully's face,
right,
by accident by me. To make a long story short, I'm running away, blizzard winter, and I said, I'm ready. The city is only 45 kilometers away. I can do this. And so 45 kilometers, what are we talking in miles? About 38 miles or so.
Yeah.
And so, but as I was walking on that main road, and it was 10 o'clock at night, blizzard storm, this car went by me, past me. You could hear there was a bunch of hooligans in there. I could hear it. They were loud. I could smell it. Alcohol. There was alcohol at play. So there was trouble coming.
Yeah.
There was that much going on. Make a long story short, I heard that voice that said, run. And this time I ran, but because I knew trouble was coming. I knew I was going to end up like a lot of those missing girls if something didn't happen. So in this particular case, when I heard that voice loud and clear, I ran across, and I don't know if you're familiar with the former Soviet Union infrastructure, and I think it might even still be the same way today. I don't know, but there was these pipes above, they put them above ground for heating. The water comes through there. So that's
I've seen it for heating.
Sure. So I don't know why they have not put them under the ground to this day, but anyway.
There's a picture in the back of the book that shows the pipes too, right?
Some are right above the ground, and some of them obviously have to be high for the cars to come through or whatnot.
Right.
Anyway, along the pass, on the passings, road passings. So anyway, so as I run, I'm running through 2-3 feet of snow, and I fall and I get hurt. I'm running into this residential building that was like 5 stories high. And so I don't know if you're familiar with that, but when you come into a residential building, first of all the apartments were assigned to you by the government in that time.
Right.
And all the doors are leather padded.
Wow.
Leather padded for sound and for keep the heat in.
For heat, yeah.
So when you're trying to knock on those doors, you can't get to them at all. So anyway, I'm trying to beat and scream my way through because I could hear they're not far behind. They got out of their car and they're running after me.
Right.
And so as I'm trying to run through each floor, nobody's answering. They're telling me, get out of here. They knew it was an orphan nearby.
Right.
And so I make it to the very, very final floor and the very, very final door. I could hear those guys coming from from the bottom of the floor, I said, that's it. I'm done. If the door doesn't open, I'm done. I was going to lose my life in that time, and I knew it. So because prior to that, I had witnessed another death just a few months earlier.
Right.
And so anyway, that very final door opened up, and the arm grabbed me and shoved me in and shut it behind me, only for me to look up, and I noticed it was my director of the orphanage. And I was in that state of shock. I broke my ankle. I still got punished. I had to do 1,000 sit-ups
Right.
for running away.
Yeah.
But
You're
the
saving
one
yourself.
thing that most fascinated me, and I describe it in my book, once again, the great power saved me, was I was like in that state of shock, like of all the people and of all the doors, it saved me once again, whatever it was. Because obviously I wasn't even Christian in that time. I've only heard about
Right.
God and Jesus, but I didn't put name to that in that time anyway. So
Sure.
yeah, that was quite an experience.
Right. And were you not running on a broken ankle at this time too?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with psychology. You know how
Yeah.
when you're in the state of shock and you're trying to survive, perhaps maybe that's why I wasn't feeling the pain just yet. I was running on the broken ankle.
Right. But that was part of the miracle too. You went upstairs, right?
Yes. I wasn't feeling it. It's like when adrenaline kicks in, you were just trying to survive the moment.
Yeah.
So in that particular case, whatever it was, that's
But
what
this
it
was,
was.
you're right. That is a second miracle. I didn't realize at the time, but now you're right. So that is another, like, oh my, what, Trefilmova? I forgot the name. What was the name?
I'm sorry?
What was the last name? I forgot who the director was. Is it Trefilmova? Who was that one?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Valery Konstantinovich.
Konstantinovich. Yeah, that's right.
Sorry.
I forgot the names. You know, I remember them, but I don't remember which one was which. That's, you're right. That was another miracle, really. And the instinct to run, yeah, I might have been there, but you heard the voice. This is the difference, and then the voice, whatever voice said to run is the one that led you to this door.
Yeah.
There's no other explanation. Your science won't be explaining this. No.
Well, there's 3 different entrances to the building. Obviously,
Right.
I take the very first one that I see, but
Yeah.
the very final door on the 5th floor, after knocking desperately trying to get inside.
Unbelievable.
That I carry with me everywhere because once again, I knew the great power saved me once again.
That's right. It was not your time. You were meant to come here, have your
tell
family,
you
and
all about it.
and tell me all about it, and have your family, and So there's other things that I want to get into, but I think I want to save it for a part 2. If you want to take a little, like 3-5 minute break,
Sure.
and just talk about a few more things, because
I'll reheat my tea.
yeah, of course. Maybe I'll make a coffee real quick.
Okay.
I want to potentially get into your reunion, that you had a reunion with your biological mother in Moldova, right? You went to Moldova to meet her. Is that right?
Yes. And it only briefly mentions it in my intro, actually.
Right. Well, you said it's going to be the next book. I was going to ask you, but you said it. So that your next book is going to be about this, right? I mean, that's already, that's another miracle.
We'll give them a couple of spoilers.
You're right. That's another miracle, in my opinion. The fact that the sleuthing that went into you being able to find, they didn't just say, "Hey, this is your mother. Go meet her." You had to go through some process, right?
Oh my gosh.
I have a few other questions that I'm curious about, and maybe if you're willing to discuss it, you did not just go through physical abuse. You experienced sexual abuse as well, and it seems as if you were attempted to be primed up to become the kind of sex trafficking victim that a lot of people that you were surrounded by might have been. You could have met, you don't even know how many people went missing and could have become that. It could have been most of them. It's still a humongous problem. I don't want to make it the focus of the conversation at all, but I still think a lot of people don't realize how prevalent it is everywhere. Most gas station bathrooms around here in Kentucky have a picture and say, look out for this. And in New York, I didn't see that anywhere, which is very surprising because I grew up in Long Island, but I was born in Queens, which is right next to New York City. So for anyone to suggest that that's not something that's going on around there is ridiculous. There's a humongously dense population. It'd be very easy to get away with it. And it's just unfortunate how many, after all the things, whatever you want to call it, the Epstein thing, all these other problems that have been coming up, it's slowly but surely coming out that this is a never-ending problem. Who knows why? I can't believe it's still a thing that is still being discussed in this level where, are you sure? Is it really that bad? It really is that bad. And I hope to just quickly touch on that maybe in the part 2 also. But I want to focus on your reunion and a few other questions about, the orphan life that I hope some of my viewers are surprised to find out about, and some other things too. We'll see. We'll leave a few nuggets for part 2.
Sure,
So
let's
thank
get
you.
back.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, this book is great. Really gives you some insight into the experience and gives you some hope. You can't wait for you to be adopted, essentially. You know what I mean? Yes, please do show it. It's available now.
On Amazon.
On Amazon, of course. And the website too, openfieldsandIronCurtains.com. Is that the website?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, please do look for it. I'll have a link in the show notes, as I always do with my guests. But thank you again, and we'll see you for part 2.
Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.